Good evening. It was the dishonesty of the key lawyer bringing cases against British forces which finally killed off the Iraq Historic Allegations team. For months now, MPs and veterans have attacked the probe, saying British soldiers were being hung out to dry and allegations of abuse and murder were being made up. More than 3,500 claims had been lodged, but not a single prosecution secured. Tonight, the fury that this went on so long and the defiance of campaigners who fear what will happen now to genuine cases against British forces.
Also tonight, he says there's no doubt he will win in the end, but Donald Trump's travel ban is stuck in court and he now has to adapt to the complexities of foreign diplomacy. So are the realities of the presidency finally coming home? The High Court declares contract workers have the same status as direct employees in a case involving a plumber. The ruling could have implications for companies like Uber and Deliveroo. And the struggle to save whales stranded on a New Zealand beach. Volunteers are trying to help them refloat after 300 have already died.
And two alarming reports tonight into the phenomenon of fake news and how it's changing politics worldwide. In Hungary, we're on the trail of one of Britain's far-right leaders who's linked to a network of fake news websites pumping out anti-immigrant propaganda. And in the Philippines, we meet the man who commands an army of internet trolls who use fake news to help President Duterte put down his opponents.
You have trolls working for you.
Yes.
And you create fake Facebook profiles.
Yes.
Which you then operate and pretend to be other people.
Yes, yes, yes.
It's cost £60 million and taken more than 6 years. But the discredited government investigation into allegations against Iraq war veterans will be shut down within months. It follows revelations that a leading human rights lawyer had acted dishonestly in bringing murder and torture claims against British war veterans. The Defence Secretary, Sir Michael Fallon, said just a handful of cases would now be handed over to the Royal Navy Police. Our Home Affairs correspondent, Darshana Soni, reports.
It has been a controversial investigation into the conduct of British soldiers in the aftermath of the Iraq War. An investigation described as a witch hunt brought by ambulance-chasing lawyers. In 2010, the Iraq Historic Allegations Team, IHAT, was established, and hundreds of soldiers received letters to say they were under investigation for abuses ranging from low-level violence to murder. 6 years and £60 million on, the Defence Secretary has announced that IHAT is to close.
This will be a huge relief to hundreds of British troops who've had these quite unfair allegations hanging over them. They're now being freed of that, and we will put in place new measures now to ensure this never happens again, that there are proper safeguards to prevent completely malicious and unfounded allegations being made against our brave servicemen and women.
Astonishingly, thousands of those malicious and unfounded allegations were brought by one man, the now disgraced solicitor Phil Shiner. Last week he was struck off for misconduct, found guilty of numerous offences, including paying a fixer to approach Iraqi civilians for business and submitting false claims against British soldiers. Shiner had begun investigating a legitimate claim, the death of the father and hotel receptionist Baha Musa, who died whilst in British Army custody in Basra in 2003, having suffered 93 separate injuries. But over the next few years, Shiner's claims rocketed and he was paid hundreds of thousands of pounds. But it's not just the conduct of solicitors that has been criticised. The MOD itself has faced questions about why claims described as obviously false were allowed to be brought in the first place.
I think the whole process has been a farce from the start. People gave Phil Shiner far too much credibility. The MOD has got a lot of questions to answer, and I hope that's what they do now. This isn't about victories or anything like that. It's about actually what happened. How can we make sure that we never put our servicemen and women in this position again?
Just hours before today's announcement on IHAT, Parliament's Defence Committee had criticised the MOD for its handling of the investigation, saying that individual soldiers had been subjected to deeply disturbing treatment. In 6 years, the only criminal conviction resulting from IHAT has been of one of its own private investigators for impersonating a police officer. IHAT will close by the summer, and as part of that process, the Royal Military Police is to discontinue about 90% of allegations of abuse from Afghanistan. But tonight, Amnesty has warned that this shouldn't mean genuine cases of abuse by British soldiers are no longer investigated.
Well, earlier I was joined from Exeter by the Conservative MP and former Army Captain Johnny Mercer, who chaired the parliamentary inquiry. I put it to him that the report revealed a shocking state of affairs.
It is. I think the IHAT process has been shocking. I think the way our servicemen and women have been treated has been appalling. Look, everyone understands, agrees with and encourages the need to prosecute those and hold those accountable who have broken the law and who have not conducted themselves to the standards that we expect and work so hard to aspire to. But that's not what this was about. This was about retrospective claims, a money-making machine by the likes of Phil Shiner. The MOD should have been on top of it much earlier on. I'm glad that we've put a stop to it now, but there's still more to do.
How then did we end up in this situation?
I think we ended up in this situation because we put people like Phil Shiner on a pedestal and we put our servicemen and women at the bottom of the priority queue when it came to looking after them. For people like me and others who've served, the idea that there would be some sort of strategic breakdown in law and order and authority in the British Army where they would conduct 3,500 war crimes in Iraq is just simply not feasible. And today obviously is a good day for it to be brought to a close, but I think it's more about those who've been dragged through it, really. I know families who've broken down and miscarriages and people who should be married by now, and you know, it's been a horrific process for them.
This is a failure of the Ministry of Defence, though, isn't it? I mean, did they put Phil Shiner on a pedestal?
Yeah, of course it is. I've said that all along. We were paying his company to fly people out to take witness statements. We were contributing taxpayers' money to this process. I mean, this is the scandal here. And, you know, it's deeply disappointing. I still don't understand. Having looked into it and done all this work, I still don't understand how we made some of the decisions that have been made. But look, the Secretary of State's taken the action he has done today. I hope that it's the beginning of a change in how we do this.
One of our sources said that IHAT investigators hadn't even been to Iraq. That's not a credible investigation, is it?
There's a number of issues like that, I'm afraid, where their credibility was called into question. You know, you had the situation at the start where, you know, Judge ruled you can't have the RMP doing it because who are the Royal Military Police, part of the Army, and I understand that. But they've then gone completely the other way and sort of farmed it out to civilian contractors who've basically had a blank cheque to do what they like when it comes to prosecuting our servicemen and women.
But there have been real abuses. Thinking back to the Baha Musa case, a man who was held in detention for 36 hours, tortured, kicked and beaten. These did happen.
Yep, there were cases. The Army, like any organisation, has its challenges and has its challenging people. And those of us who serve, you know, we would encourage the prosecution of these people because, you know, they're not what we're about. That, you know, the professional standards and the rule of law that we're trying to uphold, you can't do that if you've got these people in the Army. But IHAT didn't produce a single prosecution. You know, so they even failed to do that. It's extraordinary, really. Look, I've no doubt there were incidents where people need to be held to account, and you know, and hopefully this will enable that to take place as well, because that's what certainly the armed forces and that's what MPs want to see as well. You know, this is all about being fair and justice, and the IHAT machine was not geared towards that.
Now, there are limits to executive power, and President Trump has just run slap bang into them. Last night, an American court again refused to uphold his travel ban, leaving Mr. Trump venting his fury on Twitter about what he called the disgraceful decision and vowing to fight back. Today, the president is meeting with his golfing buddy, the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Over now to our Washington correspondent, Kylie Morris. Kylie.
Krish, Donald Trump at this stage, I think it's fair to say, has multiple fights on multiple fronts, and they're not all going his way. In terms of the court case you mentioned, here's what happened. A week ago, a court in Washington state put in place a temporary restraining order on the immigration ban. The government appealed to try to get that ban reinstated, and last night it lost. Now, that's a very shorthand way of describing things, but it's basically what happened. Now, alongside that, as you mentioned, the president has been tweeting, talking about the disgraceful courts and so-called judges, which is an absolute break with protocol that a president should be out there attacking the judiciary. Now, at a press conference he's just given alongside Shinzo Abe, he made a fresh commitment to force through the ban despite the court's decision, and more than that, hinted at mysterious new security measures.
Because safety is a primary reason, one of the reasons I'm standing here today is the security of our country. The voters felt that I would give it the best security.
So no changing course, no review, no backing down.
So we'll be going forward. We'll be doing things to continue to make our country safe. It will happen rapidly, and we will not allow people into our country who are looking to do harm to our people.
But for those who aren't convinced that America needs an immigration ban that blocks citizens from 7 Muslim-majority countries as well as refugees, the decision in the San Francisco court last night will come as a relief. The 3 Ninth Circuit judges, appointed under both Democratic and Republican presidents past, refused to reinstate Donald Trump's immigration ban.
We respect that the president has broad authority when it comes to issuing executive orders, but they still have to follow the Constitution. That's the bottom line.
Protection of the nation from foreign terrorist entry.
The 3 judges didn't rule on the executive order itself, but ruled on the government's appeal against a temporary block on the ban put in place a week ago. They rejected the government's claims that the president has authority beyond the courts to make immigration policy because national security is at stake. Not so, they say. They can review it as much as they'd like.
There is no precedent to support this claimed unreviewability, which runs contrary to the fundamental structure of our constitutional democracy.
They also observed
the government has presented no evidence that any alien from any of the countries named in the order has perpetrated an attack on the United States.
The court concluded competing public interest arguments don't justify restoring the ban.
I love you, America. I love you, America. Salam, salam.
For those arriving in America's airports from the 7 targeted, mainly Muslim countries, there was an overwhelming sense of gratitude at the court's decision.
It's been almost like 2 years, you know. I'm trying to come and to see my husband, so yeah, thanks a lot.
I wanted to walk into the airport and just start screaming, like, we won, we won.
Miriam Sadiq has worked at Washington's international airport since the president announced his executive order.
It's powerful because it shows that America has not betrayed its own values, that we are still a country of laws and not of men.
Over at the White House, the president's second defeat on this, his touchstone issue, was percolating through.
Does he see this as a setback?
I think his tweet was perfect when he said, we'll see you in court. And
that's what we're
the nation's safety is at stake here.
In response to the president's tweet, well, we have seen him in court twice, and we're 2 for 2.
Even the art of the deal seems to have deserted the president. Here he is boasting shortly after the election about the new terms he'd negotiate with China after he broke protocol and took a congratulatory phone call from Taiwan.
I fully understand the one China policy, but I don't know why we have to be bound by a one China policy unless we make a deal with China.
But then last night, another phone call, this time to Beijing, communicating that, on reflection, maybe one China is the best policy after all. 3 weeks into his new job, the man who likes to win is getting accustomed to how it feels to lose. Well, earlier I spoke to the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Federica Mogherini, who met with the Trump administration over the past few days. And I began by asking her how comfortable she feels when President Trump singles out the EU as an example to prove that mass immigration is dangerous.
I hear very different messages when we have formal meetings, and I take that for the real message. But first, it has to be very clear to the new US administration and to Americans. European problems are for the Europeans, as well as American problems are for the American president to deal with. And it seems to me that the situation here is quite tensy, and that requires probably a little bit more of political attention from the administration. We do not interfere, and we expect our partners not to interfere in our politics. We have a different view on migration. We believe that migration is not something that needs to be stopped, but managed in an orderly, humane, sensible and reasonable manner. This doesn't mean that our doors are open for everybody, but this doesn't mean that we want to stop everybody. Also because our economies, as well as the American economy, would collapse tomorrow if we were to make all migrants disappear from our countries.
Do you have full confidence that the Iran deal remains robust, despite the change in rhetoric, the change in attitude, certainly, from the Trump administration?
Yes. First of all, because we see that 1 year after the deal is working. Second, because Europe and the European Union will make sure that the deal continues to be implemented. And this means will continue to be in place.
How real is it, though, to expect that the deal can coexist with the kind of rhetoric that we've heard, for example, from Mike Flynn, putting Iran on notice, introducing new sanctions?
Europe believes in engagement with Iran, with Iranians, and in working together in all the fields where we can. This will stay, and Europe will protect this new engagement that we opened with the Iranian deal. Once we have opened this historic page of solving a nuclear issue through negotiations and diplomacy, we will do all that we can to protect this. And the international community can count on Europe to make sure that the deal is preserved.
You talked about the relationship now being a transactional and a pragmatic relationship. That is where we are, that's how things have shifted. What does that mean in reality?
We are, I think, entering into an era where we might face some different approaches on some policies or some values even, and that Europeans will be clear on where we stand.
Kylie Morris talking to the EU's Federica Mogherini. Well, I'm joined now from New York by the Trump supporter and Conservative commentator Ann Coulter. Welcome to the programme again. Why do you think Donald Trump keeps saying the security of our nation is at stake when the judges have made it absolutely clear that the government has presented no evidence that any alien from any of the countries named in the order has perpetrated an attack on the United States?
Well, two things. The judges can say that, but it isn't true. It isn't true at all. In fact, two of the famous cases just in the last year, the Somali who started stabbing people and running them over at Ohio State University, and then at Christmas time, the Somali refugee who started stabbing people at a shopping mall.
You're not going to start talking about the Bowling Green massacre, are you?
Quite recent. I was the one who first introduced that to the world, and no, I know what happened since I found out about it from reading the court transcripts and writing about it, including in my book, Adios America. So point one, the court's factual finding is wrong. Point two, it is not up to the court to make this factual finding. And it may sound like this is some horrible defeat for the president to untrained ears, but, you know, there are 1,000 judges. The Ninth Circuit is the most overruled circuit, and the law is absolutely unequivocally clear that it is the president who sets immigration policy. The courts have found that over and over and over again, that it is an extension of foreign policy. This is absolutely within the president's discretion. We don't need to hear from any federal judges on this, but we do have a lot of lawless judges. And
well, the judges make it clear it's not.
Just because they go last doesn't make them more important than the president.
I don't know whether
the president has powers that courts don't.
Yeah, I don't know whether you're a lawyer, but I mean, these judges are, and they're
Yes,
pretty clear that, you know, the idea that a presidential order on immigration can't be reviewed just isn't true. I mean, look, we'll see when this goes to the Supreme Court. But the wider question is about Trump's relationship with the truth. Because as days go on, it's more and more clear that what comes out of the president and his administration just can't be trusted. And, you know, you have to wonder whether at first you thought it was maybe he just doesn't know, maybe these are just mistakes. But now it's starting to look deliberate. It's starting to look like deliberate misinformation.
Well, that just, without any specific example. I mean, I just had to correct
let me give you a few.
The judges on a factual claim. You just repeated something that is factually untrue, that no one from these countries, I mean, there are dozens of them, have been arrested and convicted for committing terrorism, and plus which, it doesn't matter.
Well, I look forward to you sending me the list of dozens.
This is part of the president's...
I mean, let's take a, you know, if you take the Pulitzer Prize-winning
Will you
PolitiFact,
read them?
who
Wait, will you agree right
are
now to read
renowned
them?
fact checkers.
Will you read
if you
them
look
on
at
air?
their score,
I mean, you make this snotty little remark.
No,
I'd be perfectly happy to send you not only dozens
send them over.
of cases,
Do send them over.
of convictions. No, you're just being snotty and sarcastic.
No, I'm
there
trying
are
to let's get to the
cases.
questions. I mean, look, the
No,
point
I'll get
is,
to a factual case that does not require. I just gave you two. When anyone in America, certainly, I'm
when
surprised
Donald
you don't know
Trump
about the
said the
Ohio
murder rate
State
in our
University
country is the highest
stabbing
it's been in 47
or the
years.
St. Cloud Mall stabbing, I can also give you two cases that I think you ought to remember. They were certainly big cases in America. One was the president sending home Elian Gonzalez to Cuba. The court found, yes, he will be persecuted in Cuba, but immigration is solely the discretion of the president.
Okay, let's just look at some of the Trump untruths. No, hang on. Don't just keep talking. I want to ask you some questions. If you look at PolitiFact, the fact-checking website, I mean, they score Donald Trump's truthfulness extremely badly. I mean, the murder rate in our country is the highest it's been in 47 years, he said. Completely untrue. I've already saved more than $700 million when I got involved in the negotiation on the F-35. Mostly false. When he claimed that the media doesn't deliberately report on terrorist attacks around the world, it was nonsense. I mean, you can keep saying he tells the truth. It's clear to everybody else he doesn't.
No, I rate PolitiFact mostly false. So first, you have already given two false facts. Well, three, actually. We have the two I just mentioned. Yes, there have been terrorist attacks from these people. And yes, it is solely the president's prerogative in the little package that came on before I went on.
That's an argument. It's not a fact.
Absolutely.
That's a legal argument. It's not a fact.
Unprecedented, too. It is a fact that the Supreme Court has said the precise words that immigration, as an extension of the president's foreign policy, it is up to the president. They have said, and I just gave you two famous cases, so you don't have to look up the case law.
Well, address the one on
Arizona
murder.
law.
What about the murder claim?
The Elian Gonzalez case.
What about the murder claim?
Well, how about the claim that you're
was
talking
it
about
true?
something that
Was it true?
said months ago, and it was true. And you know what
It
was
was
untrue?
true.
That you just told your viewers. You just told your viewers that it's unprecedented for a president to attack judges. Obama did it at the State of the Union address, attacking judges. I mean, this idea we have President Trump all over magazines with, you know, crosshairs of an assassination target on his face, but we can't criticize these precious judges. No, liberals like judges because they're not elected and they can just invent stuff and say, oh, we read it in the Constitution.
But the question is whether it's presidential, whether it's appropriate for the leader of the free world. The reason it upsets so many people in Britain is because Britain loves America, or many people in Britain love America, and when the president appears to be tweeting about Nordstrom and his daughter's range of clothes, rather than the very serious problems that there are in the world and the terrible terrorist attack in Canada that he still hasn't mentioned anywhere, people find that really worrying. And you don't seem to find it at all embarrassing. That's what's surprising.
No, to the contrary. I've criticized him on the Nordstrom tweet, too. No, we shouldn't have done that. Congratulations. You got one. But you did misstate a fact. That is certainly not slowing him down from defending America. He's a bundle of activity, and he's able to impose these travel restrictions and fight with the court and nominate a Supreme Court justice. Oh, he can do it all and send out a mildly inappropriate tweet.
Do you think he will be offended by what's been said to him about his British trip? You know, that the Speaker of the House of Commons doesn't want him anywhere near addressing the House in the way Barack Obama did. Will he care?
No, I don't think his feelings will be hurt. I think he'll get over it. He's the leader of the free world. He's protecting America.
I mean, he does want this visit. He's talked about how important Britain is and the special relationship. And
yeah, it is.
So
it is. Britain is an important ally. And you just gave, I think, 6 false facts. You claim that the British are appalled by Trump. Well, according to the polls I see, they like that they're more in favor of this
a lot of
travel
British
ban than
people.
even Americans
I mean, you know,
are.
I won't claim to speak for my country, but a lot of people are appalled. That's pretty clear. You know, whether it's a majority or not, who knows? You know.
A lot of people are appalled about everything. To be acting like you're speaking for the British people and you're appalled by Trump, no, that is manifestly not true. My guess is you thought they were appalled by the Brexit vote, too.
Do you think...
And yet it passed.
But do you think the way this first most important executive order on the travel ban was well handled? Because, I mean, you know, we've now learned an awful lot about how it was executed, the extent to which Donald Trump really was aware of precisely what was going on, the extent to which Steve Bannon was involved in it. I mean, do you think it was handled professionally? Or do they need to learn, you know, from this and do things better?
No, the only thing they need to learn, and boy have they learned it, is that there will be massive resistance to anything Trump tries to do on immigration, which was the main reason he was elected president in a shocking victory. I mean, for Pete's sake, he's never held elective office. He's this sort of wild, brash billionaire. It's not like Americans looked around the country and said, let's put a reality TV star in the White House. No, it was because of his positions on immigration that have been ignored by both political parties and the media for decades and decades. And there is going to be massive resistance for every little thing he does. And this was a very little thing. And there was some confusion for a while in the press about whether Obama had in fact, imposed the same travel ban for 6 months.
Yeah, that wasn't true either, was it?
At some point on Syria. I didn't say it was. Perhaps you reported it. Maybe that's another false fact I'm getting from you guys. I'm just saying that it wasn't an insane extension because these are the 7 countries designated as terrorist countries, or as Madeleine Albright changed the terminology, countries of particular concern. These are the 7 terrorist countries designated by Hillary Clinton's State Department under Obama. To have a 2-month travel pause? I mean, this is the
We've got to leave it there. We've got to have a
like
pause.
this.
I hope it won't be 2 months before you come back. Ann Coulter, thank you very much. Fatima.
Now, a plumber has won a legal battle to claim employment rights for self-employed workers in a case which could have implications across the so-called gig economy. Gary Smith, who had worked for the London-based Pimlico Plumbers for 6 years, argued he was entitled to the same benefits as directly employed staff. The company is considering an appeal to the Supreme Court, but union leaders say it's exposed the problem of sham self-employment. Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, reports.
There's only one name you can trust when you need household maintenance.
If this looks like an ordinary company with offices, desks and employees going about their business, it's because it is. Pimlico Plumbers was founded in 1979 in the basement of a property firm in London. Today, the company has 325 employees, although strictly speaking, that's not true, because at least half of them are tradespeople, mostly plumbers, who work for the business on a self-employed basis.
But now Pimlico Plumbers is involved in a high-stakes court battle with one of its former plumbers, Gary Smith, who argued that because he worked for the company 5 days a week for 6 years, drove around in one of its branded vehicles, wore its branded clothes, that he was, in effect, one of its employees and therefore should have been afforded certain rights.
Instead, after Mr. Smith had a heart attack in 2010 and wanted to cut his hours, Pimlico refused. He took them to an employment tribunal claiming unfair dismissal and won. Today, the battle went even higher to the appeals court, where Pimlico lost its case for the second time. In court, it argued that the majority of plumbers at Pimlico are all self-employed and therefore have no workers' rights. But Gary Smith believed he was effectively an employee, which would give him full rights, including sick pay and holiday pay. The court instead decided he should be classed as a worker with some protections, such as the right to the minimum wage, holiday pay, and the right not to be discriminated against. The boss of Pimlico was unrepentant today.
What I'm trying to say is, he quite clearly came here on a self-employed basis and was reaping the benefits of a self-employed workmanship with us. Then all of a sudden, he has an heart attack and he wants to become an employee. The government needs to get involved in this now, and they need to clarify. You know, years ago, it used to be either an employee or self-employed. In the last 10 years, they've come up with this person called a worker, and it's confusing a lot of people, causing a lot of issues out there.
The government says it's determined to make sure employment rules reflect new ways of working. like the so-called gig economy exemplified by Uber, the ride-hailing company, and City Sprint, the bike couriers, whose self-employed workers also successfully took action to secure better rights. Uber, too, is appealing. The lawyer defending its workers welcomed today's outcome.
Really pleased with this decision because it confirms that the appeal court does look at this in the same way that we all thought they would, and that certainly the direction of travel for these cases is in the direction that we would hope, which is to support workers' rights.
As for Pimlico, the job's not over yet. The company now says it plans to appeal again, this time taking its case all the way to the Supreme Court.
Around 300 pilot whales have died after they mistakenly swam into shallow waters in a New Zealand bay, beaching themselves on the sand. They were found on Farewell Spit, which lies at the northern tip of South Island, in one of the largest strandings ever recorded, as our chief correspondent Alex Thompson reports.
Pilot whales, great whales no doubt, but sometimes not so great pilots. And the aptly named Farewell Spit in Golden Bay, a place which seems to confuse pods of pilots.
Yeah, this is the third largest mass stranding that we've recorded in our history, and so it's a very large one. Logistically, it's a massive undertaking. The whales started stranding last night, around about 10 o'clock last night. We were notified of that, and then this morning when they went out and checked on them, most of the whales were already dead.
Bathing the bodies in cool water or covering them with wet blankets, keeping hold of a chance to refloat.
And make sure those seats are really, really nice and wet, not covering the blowhole, going round the dorsal fin, so not over the top of the dorsal fin.
Nursing the flimsy chance of survival or merely prolonging death with the best of intentions. Well, either way, they converged here from all over the region to help as news of the mass stranding spread.
Oh, it's amazing, and there are people from all over the world. Anyone who's within Kui has heard about this. They've just come over. We brought 3 hitchhikers over who just said they wanted to come here and do whatever they could.
Which in some cases was simply standing there, cordoning the fatal shallows from pods of confused pilots still out there. Rescuers say around 450 beached, 300 died, leaving people trying to refloat the rest, and they did get about 50 into deeper water, but they were clearly disorientated.
Yeah, they weren't swimming off strongly. They weren't looking very, organised. Sometimes you refloat a pod and you can see them, all the dorsal fins are pointing the way, same way, and they're moving off together as a pod. These guys didn't do that.
Marine conservationists globally remain at a loss to explain this phenomenon. It certainly isn't new. Observational evidence suggests profound herding instinct to follow the leaders, even if they're confused, plays a part, along with particular species being susceptible.
Pilot whales, sperm whales, various toothed whales are very gregarious animals, very highly communicative. They use sonar to navigate their way around, and when they do get into especially shallow water, their navigational with a brilliant navigational ability at sea, tends to get a bit scrambled.
As we saw somewhat closer to home almost a year ago when a small pod of toothed whales again, this time sperm whales, became stranded on the coast of North Norfolk, sadly with fatal consequences.
Now, as we've already seen on tonight's programme, the challenge, finding the truth in a sea of disinformation, sorting facts from alternative facts, when the leader of the free world tweets in angry capitals, when journalists can't even ask questions without their own integrity being questioned. This is the world of fake news, which we've been reporting all week, from Europe's far-right Holocaust deniers to Google's algorithm, which throws out offensive suggestions to a simple search. It seems the big lie won't die, it just goes viral instead. Tonight, we meet the social media trolls operating openly in the Philippines. We speak to one of Europe's leading philosophers about the illusion of freedom. But first, Paul McNamara has been to Hungary to track down one of Britain's far-right leaders.
I'm not going to give you a question. Can you state categorically? You are fake news.
Fake news played a role in this election.
I'm really surprised the BBC is reporting fake news.
Are we fake news, Kellyanne? Is CNN fake news?
No, I don't think CNN is fake news.
Well, they might not be, but what is fake news anyway? Sometimes full-on fiction shared on social media, sometimes tall tales exaggerated to the extreme. We've come to Hungary to try and find James Dowson, a British far-right financier who finds sanctuary for his views here in a country with a right-wing government. He's a consultant to a host of dubious news sites.
A network of websites all lead back to this address here in Budapest. Pro-Trump websites in the US, anti-immigration sites in the UK, right-wing websites across the whole of Eastern Europe. But unlike many other so-called fake news sites, merely making money isn't the end game here. Regime change is. Because behind all of them, at the heart of these sites, is a group called Knights Templar International. And for them, internet propaganda is merely the latest weapon in an age-old crusade.
Linked to all these sites is a group called Knights Templar International, Christian fundamentalists who believe they're on a mission from God.
We call it crusade.
Is that how you see it? You see yourself involved in a holy war?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, hi there, I'm a journalist from Channel 4 News in London, and we're trying to speak to Knights Templar and James Dowson.
James Dowson is the spokesman for Knights Templar International. And he's no stranger to the far right. He raised millions for the BNP, then bankrolled Britain First, the far-right political party, and now he's gone international and moved into advising news sites, of a sort. Hillary Clinton talking to the dead on patriotnewsagency.com. Angela Merkel using the hand signs of secret societies on thisisengland.org. All websites that lead back to James Dowson and Knights Templar International. All websites claiming to be reputable, credible news sources. Knights Templar are experts at exploiting social media to promote their message, according to former BNP member turned anti-fascist campaigner Matthew Collins.
They are pumping out thousands and thousands of pieces of literature. They're offering websites, Facebook pages to people. They've worked out how to use the algorithms that Facebook uses, and I think to a degree Twitter might use, so they can exploit them.
There's another reason these sites look like credible sources of news, the credible brands whose adverts appear on them. And that's because of software like Google's AdSense displaying targeted ads. Often unknown to both the reader and the advertiser, it's an algorithm responsible for ads by respected news outlets like the Financial Times, the New Statesman magazine, or brands like the Open University that has placed them on the pages of the Trump tub-thumping Patriot News Agency. The Financial Times, New Statesman and Open Universities all told us the integrity of their brands were paramount, and they were frustrated to see adverts on these sites. The problem is the nature of the algorithms, they say, and they would like tech providers to do more. And Google told us they disable ad serving against websites that break strict policies of malice or misrepresentation, and urge users to contact them if they're concerned rules are being broken. Winter months are slow months for tourism in Budapest. Not that a bit of cold seems to deter Mr. Dowson.
So what is it about Hungary? Why are far-right bit players from the fringes of British politics cropping up 1,000 miles from home? Well, here their views aren't on the fringes. Here their views won 20% of the vote at the last general election. Here their views are represented significantly in Parliament.
Dowson has been able to fit right in with the far-right scene here, caught in the Jobbik party. We've come to ask about Dowson's involvement. A decade ago, Jobbik barely existed. As you can see, they've grown. At this Jobbik rally 3 years ago, thousands gathered for a political party that has openly vilified Jews, gays and foreigners. Today, they are the country's official opposition, and last month relaunched the party with a policy shift to the mainstream.
This is now the era of the new Jobbik, the softer Jobbik, but some would say you've had the views you've had for the last 10 years. Have they really changed, or are you just a wolf in sheep's clothing now?
I won't deny it, absolutely. But the packaging is different, and you have to be able to...
And is it the packaging that's important?
Well, sometimes. I mean, of course, if you go into a shop, then the packaging and the appearance also appeals.
A few alternative facts of their own, perhaps. So what about the impact of fake news? It's awful, they say, but then said all media can misinform, even if unintentionally.
And what do you think of the ones on purpose?
The majority of our battles, and this you can think of military battles or economic battles or trade battles or whatever, are fought through the soft power, by the means of soft power, and the media is also within the soft power.
No surprise then the affinity between the party and James Dowson. This picture taken inside the Hungarian parliament as guests of Jobbik, according to the Knights Templar International. And Mr Dowson is supportive too of the militias that back Jobbik. This is him this week.
Just because they're big guys with muscles and no hair doesn't mean they're any less a human being. They are my friends and I'm very proud to be associated with them.
Not that Mr Dowson limits his work to just Hungary. Here he is supplying a Bulgarian militia who patrol the borders for migrants.
The Knights Templar have came and gave them ballistic vests, drones, night vision goggles to help these people in the job that they've got. These are not Boy Scouts coming through here.
Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban has already drawn the country right of centre, with his clampdown on media, clampdown on migrants and a razor-wire fence around its borders. The allure for the far right isn't that surprising to journalists here, but it is deeply concerning.
Hungary has a far right-wing government led by Viktor Orban. In Hungary, the majority of the residents refused the migration from the east, from Syria, from Afghanistan.
James Dowson told us that alongside the many thousands of accurate articles on those websites, there are 2 or 3 that he would question. He told us he's delighted to advise many patriot groups around the world, but didn't actually own the website or operate on the behalf of any group, website or company. He added his main activities with Knights Templar International have been delivering large quantities of winter clothes to poor European families. Tonight, the articles we flagged have been pulled off the web. The internet is a few fake stories lighter.
Well, on to the Philippines, where foul-mouthed online trolling isn't just legal, it's openly courted to aid political campaigns or denigrate opponents. In fact, armies of them have been credited with helping President Duterte get into power, while his rivals have been accused of similar dirty tactics. Our correspondent Kieran Jenkins has been finding out how the war of ideas is being fought on social media, with high-profile personalities on both sides. And a warning, there's flash photography in his report.
In the Philippines, there's not just a war on drugs, there's a war on the truth.
It's deliberate control of the minds of other people.
Fake news, fake people.
So you literally just go on the internet and find a picture of some bloke and assume his identity?
Yes. Unsure who to believe.
So you're the Mocha girls, right?
Filipinos are turning to unorthodox sources.
So you're like a mouthpiece for the government?
Well, something like that, but it's voluntary.
We're in Manila, in the Philippines. A nation seemingly besotted with their newish president and his crackdown on drugs.
If you destroy my country, I'll kill you.
Although Rodrigo Duterte is accused of inciting the killing of thousands of his own people, he rules with remarkably little dissent.
Now, the war on drugs here has been violent, it has been unprecedented. But less well understood is how attempts to influence ordinary Filipinos' response to it is a phenomenon in itself. Go online here and you will find some of the most fearsome internet trolls in the world. These are anonymous, organized social media users who have taken threatening, intimidating, silencing their opponents to a whole new level. Hello. Hi.
Just look at what's happened to Duterte's most vocal opponent.
Overnight, I got more than 2,000 hate messages and calls, including death threats.
Senator Leila de Lima has been the subject of countless fake news articles.
So they made it appear that my son was with me, and then he was caught, arrested for possession of 50 kilograms of drugs.
She's also been accused of taking payoffs from drug lords and of filming a sex tape with her driver. These last 2 accusations have been advanced by President Duterte himself.
Every time I view the video, I lose my appetite.
The president has suggested that you took part in a sex tape. And it was
He's so sick. He's sick-minded. It's incessant. They are relentless. So in various forms, I'm being attacked at all fronts.
Do you honestly believe that President Duterte is using fake news, using internet trolls to try and destroy you?
Oh yes, I have no doubt about that. because I've seen how capable they are.
Online gossip has a habit of seeping into the mainstream here. Filipinos are among the world's most prolific social media users. So owning the online debate matters, and to control, you need trolls.
I myself, I'm a troll.
And this man will happily sell you some.
You have trolls working for you.
Yes.
And you create fake Facebook profiles.
Yes.
Which you then operate and pretend to be other people.
Yes, yes, yes.
Armand Nokum says he has operatives across the Philippines controlling 30 or 40 fake accounts each.
So if I'm a political candidate in the Philippines and I say something against your candidate, will your trolls attack me?
Yes, by the hundreds of them. We are capitalizing on the tendency of people to go where many are going. You to call that herd mentality.
Herd
yes.
mentality. So should we look in this box?
No way.
Armand is an ex-journalist. He says he doesn't do fake news, just trolls he supplied to 30 political campaigns, but not to President Duterte.
You were given the impression that there is public support for certain things when it's all made up, it's all created by you, it's all false.
It's propaganda, yes, but propaganda is as old as men, right?
Welcome to Rappler.
On the trail of the trolls, the editor of a major news website.
Do you think what's happening here in the Philippines is in any way more unique than the rest of the world?
We're 6 months ahead of the United States.
Maria Ressa says her investigation shows Duterte trolls are being paid up to 100,000 pesos, £1,600 a month, but she hasn't found a direct link to the president.
And how convinced are you that that itself is true?
How convinced are you that the story that you would do, that you would put your name on, is true? We were trying to understand why the Philippines, which had long stood for human rights, why it's okay that thousands of Filipinos are being killed in the drug war. So what is it? When people post on social media that they question it, they're clobbered.
Duterte's government say they don't pay trolls. But the president has been quick to denounce sections of the media, and many here now get their news and opinion from elsewhere.
Now, for a month before and a whole month after the election, Duterte refused to speak to the press, wouldn't give any interviews, with one exception, this woman right here.
Buka Uson, singer, dancer, former sex blogger, now a pro-Duterte blogger with 4.8 million Facebook followers.
Different government agencies, they send their, if they want to, disseminate information, they send me emails, and I post them on Facebook.
What if the government isn't telling the truth?
Mocha says she's a victim of trolling. So we talk about the alleged smear campaign against Duterte's chief critic.
What about the rumours that are spread about De Lima having a sex tape? The rumours
Are you
spread
sure
by
that's
the
a rumor?
Duterte himself?
Are you sure that's a rumor?
Are you sure it's not?
Are you sure it's not a rumor?
Are you sure it's not?
Well, maybe we'll wait for things to happen.
If this is an information war, Duterte appears to be winning. Right and wrong, true and false, the lines are increasingly blurred.
After the break, we speak to Marxist philosopher Slavoj Žižek. Populism, truth and fake news. In an age where the revolution will be live tweeted, how can the real news keep up?
Now, he's said the Liberal left is as guilty of an assault on information as the far right, and claimed that we're under the illusion of being free to decide how to vote. That's the philosopher Slavoj Žižek. I spoke to him earlier from Slovenia and asked him what he thinks is behind the surge in populist politics in which many people share fake news.
The ongoing rise of populism is grounded for many ordinary people precisely in this growing experience of don't believe in what government of public media are telling you.
But whose fault is this?
We should not just blame the right-wingers. Usually the right is accused of exploding with fake news and so on and so on. Unfortunately, I must say the left is doing the same, not only at the level of spinning, of giving a spin to news. For example, in Europe, I can see this all the time, now that we have this problem with immigrants. On the one hand, the nationalist right-wing media exaggerate every small incident. On the other hand, the left mainstream media censor the news.
There is a difference between good journalism that is inconvenient and bad journalism and fake news, which is completely made up and designed to mislead you.
I totally agree with you. There is a tremendous interest between serious journalism, which also can go wrong, and this marginal fake media manipulators. But the line is getting blurred, which is terrible news for honest journalists.
We live in an era in which living standards have improved historically, people are better educated, there are more democratic freedoms, and yet there seems to be more political anger across the Western world and across democracies. And I wonder why that is.
Oh, I think to this I can give you a simple answer. The first sad lesson from history is that anger, rage, and so on don't explode. I'm almost tempted to say they almost never explode when the situation is really horrible or when we have total oppression and so on. Rage is always a question of comparative dissatisfaction. Rage means that people have higher standards of expectation and also they feel the difference. That's the big problem. Today is the dangerous situation for something to happen in China, not in North Korea, where they would have had much more reasons to be in total rage.
So what happens now after Trump? You know, will there be a backlash after Trump, because there is so much expectation there, expectation he surely can't deliver on?
I hope so. That's why I mockingly, although I'm horrified at Trump, not supporting him, but claimed maybe his electing Trump can give a boost to a new left in United States. But you know what worries me with Trump? Don't underestimate him. Quite often, it happens that even if a leader like Trump is a populist demagogue and so on, at least in the short term, he will be maybe able to deliver. You know, it is as if these left liberal commentators, who are typically the most successful, are comedians, like John Oliver, Jon Stewart, and others. They don't see that by mocking Trump in this way, they don't really undermine him. They just render bitter and more fanatical those who support Trump. And this is very sad. Instead of proposing an alternate vision of how to change things, all the liberal left is doing, or at least what is it doing in the most convincing way, is making fun, demonstrating the stupidity and so on and so on. All the big problems that we see today. Why did new populism explode? Ecological problems and so on and so on. Trump is the reaction to these problems. That's my big motive. Trump is, as they say, an effect, not a cause. Well, if we will just fight Trump, in the long term, it will not work. It will be a catastrophe.
If Trump
ecological
is a
catastrophe,
reaction,
cultural catastrophe, whatever you want.
If Trump is a reaction to the failure of democracy, does democracy hold the answer?
I'm definitely not saying we should move beyond democracy. But we should do something with democracy. The solution is not just fight Trump, fight fake news. The solution is a new global leftist vision.
The philosopher, Slavoj Žižek.
That's all we've got time for tonight.
We're back tomorrow at 6:30. Until then, have a very good evening.
Good evening.